Okay, I think the live is working, which is excellent news for you and me. I'm just going to plug this in, as usual. I wonder why all my shirts have a little pinch in the top left corner. I think that's the answer, isn't it? Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, it's Matt Bailey here, the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I really appreciate you all coming in, joining into the stream, having a chat, tasting a few things. And tonight's theme is time capsules old and new. So it's a very specific sort of thing I want to touch on tonight. And it nerds out a bit, but I was kind of inspired by what happened the other night with the Franz Schur dinner. So just first of all, a big shout out to everyone who's already tuning in. Robert Akers, Just Dramming, Lockie, Jay Hodes, Sable Scotch, Tim McGuigan, Petrino11. Tim, good to see you last night. Monarch Perth, Benoit. Everyone's joining in. Look at this. This is great. This is my daily stream, as you know. I do a video every single day talking about something to do with whiskey, which is a lot of fun. I find it a lot of fun. And I'm back to normal camera setup tonight, which is better than my last few nights. But the camera is now facing the right way around again, and I think it's a better angle this way as well. So, and as always, I'm surrounded with bottles of whiskey on the table and around me here. And actually, the water jug I'm going to use tonight, how cool is this? This is one of those old Bob Dewar water jugs with the old cartoons. For any members who have been around a long time will remember some of this livery, and of course the old logo on the other back and the other side of it there, which is just a beautiful old ceramic jug that used to be sold to members. I think they were like £12 or something, so probably about $25 now. But that was sort of £12 back in 1990s. So, it would have been a fairly expensive little ceramic jug, but kind of cool anyway. So, Sally, good to see you. Jay Hodes, thank you. Wave, hello. Whiskey and Drinkies, good to see you. Time capsules old and new. That's what I wanted to touch on and start with tonight. Let me explain what I mean. Often when drinking old bottles of whiskey, and like for instance, for those who are at the Vaults dinner may remember drinking through some of 123.1, that was a very, very tasty whiskey indeed. One that I'll remember for a long time. A very nice piece of history, that one there. Now, for those who got to taste that bottling that we shared around at the Vaults dinner, unfortunately there was not even a drop left for after the event, as you can see. But this was a 1996 distillate, bottled 2005, called A Fascinating Experiment. And it was a single cask, but it's sort of as always, everything we do. But the thing with this is it was an old bottling, so it was a time capsule of a different time of whiskey making. Even as late as 1996, it was a different era of whiskey making. Robert Akers, I don't know about you, but this was probably one of my favourites on the night. The 46.3, those two are probably my absolute standouts. But being able to taste the .1 is very cool. So 123 is a lovely distillery that sort of splits between the Highlands and the Lowlands. They make a very, very clean, completely unpeated spirit. But I'll tell you just more. I'll tell you a few things. The thing is, this was tasting a time capsule, just like tasting any old whiskey, like tasting that bottle of Thompson's that I've shown a few times. I'll show for those who haven't seen it, the Thompson's blended whiskey that we opened with on the night. They are time capsules of a different era of when whiskey existed, and a different taste of what whiskey was, which is very cool. And it's kind of like you get to taste something. It's not just you're tasting something of a time capsule of an era that no longer exists. However, you can still have that same experience with modern bottlings, and I'm going to show you how. Let me start by pouring a dram just to so I'm not talking the whole time. Nice healthy measure of that one. Okay. 12.24, urbane and lovable. I apologise for the scribble on the label, but that's what it is. 12.24, urbane and lovable, and it's a spicy and sweet. It's an 8-year-old, and it's from a first fill ex-bourbon barrel. Now this is quite significant. I'll explain why, and I'll show that label once more because it didn't look like it came up very well in that last shot just then. I'll give it a bit of a swivel there so you can catch all the details on it. This is a recent bottling. I think it's all but sold out. Maybe there's one or two left, if that, but I think it has sold out. But we've had a string of 12s lately. Now, Distillery 12 is a Speyside distillery that's getting a lot more attention now since the new ownership bought them in 2017. 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. They were purchased by a big company called Brown Forman. known for their known for Jack Daniels, known for Woodford Reserve, but they now have some single malts under their radar, including Distillery 12, which starts with a B. I'll let you work out the rest. And a comment that Andrew Durbidge made when he was presenting this whiskey at the Franz Schura dinner on Monday night, was that this distillery was known for being was remarkably unremarkable, in that it was a distillery that for a long time wasn't very what's the word for it? It was an unremarkable distillery, and it was known for one thing. It was known for putting a lot of spirit into a lot of tired refill casks. And now in the new ownership, they're addressing that by putting spirit into much more rejuvenated casks, and then re-racking into wine casks and re-racking into sherry casks, etc. However, to taste something that is an 8-year-old that is from a first fill barrel has so much more influence to it, and it's actually really exciting to taste that. So it's actually, you're tasting a time capsule of what the distillery sort of, where they've been since and where they've been previously, if that makes sense. So you're tasting tasting a piece of liquid history from a different era of the distillery. I'll just say hello to some people who have just joined. Whiskey Saurus, Tasmanian Whiskey, December 16, thank you, SMN. I knew it was 16 or 17, but it's obviously right in between there. Hospital Hill, McGuigan, good to see you. Monster of Malt joined, good to see you. Any bees coming out that you know of? No, Jay Heard, if I'm being honest. There's quite a few coming down the track in about, I'd say, the next few months, but nothing in the immediacy. So there's some B's coming out, and for those who are not following along here, B is for bourbon, so our bourbon coding. Both Kai and Ewan in our whiskey team over in the UK have been travelling around the United States, especially Kentucky and Tennessee, especially over the last few weeks. And so they've been securing a lot of good stocks coming through. And the stocks that will have to pass through a tasting panel that are that will be available, they'll be coming out soon. But we should see a lot more bees coming, because there's a lot of demand for them, and they're tasty casks, especially when they're single cask bourbons. I don't drink a whole lot. I drink a whole lot less bourbon now than I used to. I used to really drink a lot more bourbon. I used to really enjoy it a lot more. I think I have to be in the mood for it. It's very much a weather-dependent drink. Bourbon's great in summer. I love drinking bourbon in summer, and I love drinking sort of, in the heat of summer, a good bourbon can be lovely. I think it's just like, it's almost a pairing of weather and spirit. But in outside of summer, though, it's sort of like I enjoy it still, but I'm more of a Scotch whiskey guy. Malt whiskey guy generally, no matter where it comes from, but a lot of it comes from Scotland, of course. That sounds like a terrible job. What happens to casks that don't get the tasting panel stamp of approval? Very good question, Just Ramming. I'll answer that one now. What happens to casks that don't get approval? So last time I checked with panel, it was about 55-58% clearance rate. So that means that 55 to 58% of all casks that went through panel passed. Now, there's often reasons why casks won't pass that other 45%. So why certain casks won't pass panel? They were not good enough to be bottled as a society bottling. A, it's still too young. So if it's still too young, we bottle it when it's ready, not when it reaches a certain age. If we think, it's a 10-year-old whiskey, it'd look cool with a 10-year-old age statement, or a 20-year-old whiskey would look cool with a 20-year-old age statement, but it might not be ready yet. So maybe we'll bottle it as a 21 or a 22 or a 23-year-old. Have to wait. So it's ready when it's ready, and so if it doesn't pass panel sometimes because it's too young. The second reason why it might not pass panel is because it's just a hot tannic spirit that is not getting any better in that cask. So it's deemed a flawed spirit. Now, sometimes we have bottled in the past, as members will know, we have bottled some sherried whiskies that had a bit of sulfur element to it from cask sulfur. That's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people love it. A lot of people don't like it. And some people fervently hate it. But it's a certain profile. And so if you like sulfur, if you like that sort of heavy sort of sulfur character in a cask, imparting into the spirit, you might like those kind of things. Sometimes they may not pass panel though, especially if it's a really runny egg kind of sulfur, as I should say. Or worse. A bit of sort of methane sulfur. No fart jokes tonight, I promise. So, but look, I mean, it might not pass because it's just not going to get any better. And the ones that don't pass, we'll find out what to do with them. So a lot of the time they'll get re-racked. They might have some different maturation technique. They might be extra matured. If that's not deemed going to fix it, if it's already too far gone, it'll often be sold on to other bottlers or blenders or back to distilleries. It's there's always a usage for it. Trust me, it's Scotland. They don't tip whiskey out over there. It's they'll use it somewhere, but it might not be what was originally intended. Okay. Gianni Ching joined. Good to see Gianni. Hot bourbon is great when it's winter as well, but I think anything is great at a time. A hot bourbon? You mean like a hot toddy, but using bourbon? I could get around that. Pablo Gotto joined. Good to see you. Muzzman, good to see you. Ahoy, you forgot the time. Yes, it is that 8 o'clock time, isn't it? I've already been talking for about 11 minutes, non-stop, so I haven't had a nose of this yet. 1 second. So those who've just joined in, I was talking about how we often get wrapped up in vintage bottlings, and I was holding an old paper label Society bottling for a bit there, just saying we often get wrapped up in always wanting to taste, like especially as you go along your whiskey journey. If you're quite new into whiskey, this might not interest you as much, but if you're quite into it, there's always that temptation to want to find historical pieces of whiskey and pieces of like whiskey history, and you want to taste them, as it'd be kind of cool to see what was happening at that distillery or what was happening in the whiskey industry in general when that was distilled. However, don't get too wrapped up in that. As I'm saying, like this 1224 is a perfect example of a modern whiskey history from a distillery that has undergone changes, and to see it in a first fill bourbon barrel with all those rich sweetness and spicy sort of vanilla notes through it. And there's all sorts of stuff going on in this one. There's Turkish Delight, there's lemon curd, there's scones, it's gingerbready, it's lovely. It's a lovely cask, and I think they're often overlooked, some of the 12s, probably because we've had a few of them. Which leads me to, before I even get onto that one actually, before I talk about that one, I should make mention that even in our Christmas outturn, our festive edition here, if you flip to page 12, that there's another, no, ignore that, not page 12, sorry, page 11, excuse me, there's a Fruit Pickers Tipple, 12.26, 2 casks along in that series. Take a look at that image there, you'll see it. I'll just make sure the camera can hold that one up as everyone is looking okay. Yeah, I think you can see that. So yeah, basically what we've got there is it's a rich first fill, again, first fill single cask from Distillery 12. And in this case, an 8-year-old at 59.8%, a first fill barrel ex-bourbon. Let's have a nose of that. It's a big one on the nose. It's really big. You can see it's actually picked up a fair bit of colour from the cask after even just 8 years. All natural colour, of course, as we always do at the Society. Wow. Definitely sweet. I'm going to have a taste of that without water. Wow. Yeah, that's remarkable. That's a really enjoyable nose, and even more enjoyable on the palate. There's just so much life to the spirit. There's and putting things in first fill barrels. And I understand I am fervently a member of hashtag Team Refill. So I will say that there's lots of things to consider there. But Team Refill, I love you guys. But and we're talking about people who love refill casks, and I am one of them. Huge fan of refill. But there's a time and place for a really juicy, rich first fill cask. And that, whether it be a sherry cask, whether it be a port cask, whether it be a fortified wine of some description, or an ex-wine cask, or in this case, my favourite is first fill bourbon barrels. I actually normally preference first fill bourbon barrels over even first fill sherry casks for lots of reasons, because modern sherried whiskey from first fill barrels, for me, I find often a little bit, not hollow, but often overly tannic, and the first fill influence from a seasoned cask can be a bit sort of, it's not to my liking. It's all personal preference. If I could drink 2 cask types forever, it'd be refill sherry, first fill bourbon. A few refill bourbons as well, please. But I mean, yeah, I love my first fill bourbon casks, because, and I always try and spot them in outturn as well, because they have so much to give in terms of the overall influence to the spirit. Another example of that would be the 123.35 in outturn, a Splash of the Tropics. I'll admit I've not tasted that cask yet, but super clean spirit coming out of 123. Super clean. Like lovely, luscious, rich spirit coming out of there. And again, there's quite a few first fills in this issue actually, which is lovely, and a couple of refills, of course. Love the refills. Team refill. So there's a lot in Outturn, of course. Outturn is Friday. We're 2 days away. Today being Wednesday, so check out Outturn this Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, refill casks with some age can be quite special, Muzz. But Muzz, just to counter that point, just because I'm playing devil's advocate to that comment, I would argue that refills on even young whiskies can do remarkable things, and it can really let the spirit shine without it being new makey. You're not getting those low wines, those feints. You're getting a lot of spirit character, which is desirable and has had good maturation from kind of an active refill cask. And a good example of that would be the Percolator of Pine Cones. That was a standout cask at the Melbourne Gathering. I featured that one. It's a 9-year-old from Distillery 70. If you know Distillery 70, it's that very clean, old school traditional way of making whiskey distillery. And that's 70.33. That's very cool to think, isn't it? And a 9-year-old refill. You don't need 20, 30, 40 years for refill to work. It can work at 9 years old. And that one is an example of a really lovely Percolator Pine Cone kind of spirit. And that's what you want. Matt Music MW joined. Good to see you. So yeah. Absolutely agree. Refill lets the spirit shine through, Muzz. You're entirely correct. I have tasted that now, and I'm going to add a few drops of water. I'm using the old school jug because why not? I've got a few glass jugs, but this one's perfectly fine. Just a small dash of water to that. I don't think it needs a whole lot. So the sweetness has dulled a bit on the nose, and I'm getting way more. There's way more complexity with a bit of water though. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, it's lovely. You know what? For those who have a bottle of Urbane Lovable, if you tasted it at the Sydney Whisky Fair this year, or if you tasted it at the Franz Schura dinner on Monday night, that's delicious. That is exactly what you want in a first fill whiskey. So much flavour, so much just lovely sort of sweetness, but the sweetness sort of fades a bit with water, but in a good way, and it gets that almost like there's a savoury Turkish delight note. Definitely Turkish delight in that whiskey. Where does that flavour come from? Honestly, you think about this, it's like, where does that flavour come from? We're not adding Turkish delights to the cask. We're not mixing the spirit with sugar. It's just the complexities of the wood that impart into an already well-considered made spirit. Makes for a lovely whiskey. What are you on, Matt? Matt Music MW, sorry. I'm on 12.24 Urbane and Lovable. It's a spicy and sweet first fill from a distillery that starts with B, ends in Riarc, and is a lovely distillery that Andrew remarked at the Franz Schura dinner is known for being remarkably unremarkable in its recent years. In terms of, there was not much to talk about with that distillery apart from their buyouts and who owns them, because they used to fill most of their spirit into mostly refill casks and a lot of very inactive casks, and then they'd re-rack them into much more active casks for a shorter maturation. I think their policies will obviously change with the new ownership from Brown-Forman, and they'll get a lot more access to first fill casks that impart a lot of flavour, and then maybe use those refills as well. Question from Sable Scotch. What do you see as the key differences with a first fill cask when it comes to grain versus malt whiskey? Ooh, Sable Scotch, that's a bloody good question. What do I see as the key differences with a first fill cask when it comes to grain versus malt? Honestly, not much of a... I mean, obviously they both impart different flavor profiles over time, refill versus first fill, whether it be grain or malt. I find that first fills with grain just have so much obvious vanilla. And it's not always the case, but most of the time they have a really obvious sort of thick layering of that buttery sort of vanilla note across the whole spectrum, which is why refills in grain I think are far preferable and are far more widely used as well, especially in grain whiskey, for blenders and whatnot. But it's and I find there's way more complexity under the surface layer of grain. And grain, I've talked about this on live before. In fact, I dedicated a whole live session on Instagram to this a few weeks back about how grain whiskey is completely underrated. and people often overlook it because they think it's just filler for blended whiskey, which is completely the wrong way of thinking about it. It's the wrong way of approaching it altogether. So my main point back then was saying how it's actually, I would argue, as much complexity and as much fun to be had in a grain whiskey as there is malt whiskey. It's just a different beast. That's like, if you say grain's inferior to malt for any reason, you're either saying that because you know that the cost of production is cheaper because of scale of economy, so you think it must be inferior when it's not, and B, you're either saying that, you could be saying that because you know it's a filler for blends, in which case it is, but it doesn't mean that single casks at cask strength can't be amazing. I would argue that refills work better in grain. That's again totally subjective, but I'd argue that they work better in grain because grain whiskey is filled into the cask often very high proof, so that it's going to suck a lot of that vanilla out of the cask and a lot of those ex-bourbon characteristics. First fill sherry grain can be very clean, but often a little bit sort of miss the mark, a little bit too clean, if that makes sense. That loses any of that grit, any of that sort of character that you get out of a malt whiskey when it comes to sherry casks. But I'm generalizing and I'm being subjective, but I'm providing my opinion because you asked for it. So that's what I wanted to start with. So there we go. Yeah, plenty of sugars in American oak. That's true. Yeah, well, we don't add sugar, Robert. That's what was my point. Yes, there's natural wood tannins, natural wood sugars impart into the spirit. Yes, but it's not like adding white sugar or something, caster sugar into it. Malt official joined. Tim, depends on the type of grain you use today. That's a really good point, malt official. It does depend on the type of grain. It's in like what type of grain is being used. If it's corn, wheat, rye, maize, etc. So, or a mixture, or there you go. So there's the type of grain takes a huge influence, just as the strain of barley plays a huge influence on the flavour of whiskey. The strain of barley and the yeast strains play a huge, massive part as well. And then the water. Was it a Mozzie? Sorry. So yeah, this is it's an amazing discussion though, one that we could spend hours talking about the influence of grain versus malt, etc. Dan Small, good to see you, Dan. Hope you're well, mate. Thanks, mate. Very interesting. You're very welcome. Sammy J 2019 joined. Good to see you, Sammy J. So yes, there's all sorts of influencing factors there, and I think, as I said before, it's underrated. But I was talking about first fill here, but I sort of got diverted onto talking about first fill casks for a while there, and first versus refill, but also just how you can drink modern pieces of history without needing to dial back in time with something like a paper label, or even more modern than that, or even older than that. When there's pieces of modern history being bottled now from eras of distilleries that have changed recently, and where like distilleries that may have only ever used refill. But this is one of the things that I love most about the society, is that what's the point in knowing the distillery name if what we bottle is so far removed from the house style? Like if we bottle an unpeated 29 or a peated 2, you know what I mean? Like there's no sort of like there's no sort of benchmark for that's that sort of thing. So we have to. I hope you understand where I'm going with that. It's like we're so far removed from the house style because they're so utterly unique and being single cask, which is kind of what I love most about it, is that I could taste something and not look at the code, and I could sort of pour it like that with my hand over the bottle. I might be able to see the flavor profile, of course, but that's kind of helpful. And then I'll pour it, put it down so I can't see the label, and I get to experience the flavor of that whiskey rather than focusing on the brand or the name, or saying, oh, that's too unlike the house style, or that's too... And then, you see, the thing is, I've noticed at tastings, people often are then almost disappointed because it's so far removed from the house style. They're like, oh, I really wanted a big peaty Lefroy. And you're like, well, this is different. This is unique. This is a one-off. Like, yeah, if you want a big peaty Lefroy, you know how to get that. But you might not get that tasting something unpeated from, say, Distillery 29. Or Distillery 33, or vice versa, you're tasting something heavily peated from a distillery that doesn't often peat. Some distilleries doing like a 3-week run, a year of peated casks, and they might be siphoning all that for themselves for special releases or blenders or whatever they're using it for, and then it's like, yeah, it's good to get that kind of stuff and actually have a bit of fun with it. Jimmy Martin, good to see you, Jimmy. Looking at those pics for you, champ. Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. There was just that one of Andrew and I that I couldn't find, and it wasn't that folder, but I really appreciate you finding that. That's all I really wanted to touch on tonight. A bit of a 25-minute monologue. I often get on my soapbox, and then I end up getting diverted by great questions, which is great. You don't drink SNWS to drink something that's exactly like what you would normally drink. That's a really good point, Jay Hodes. It's exactly what I'm trying to hammer home here, in saying that you don't drink society casks. You don't open and enjoy them for the sake of saying that I always buy this code because I love that distillery. I think that's a really weird way of doing it, and it's sort of like it's the traditional way of buying whiskey. It's like, hey, you walk into a whiskey shop, you'd walk into like a commercial bottler, you walk into a Dan Murphy's, you walk into a Vintage Cellars, whatever it is, and you see the wall, and you know what you're looking at. You already know what you're looking at. Most people already know, like, most of the brands. Some of the brands you might not know, depending on how far along your whiskey journey you are. But sort of, you're always relying on brand pedigree for a flavour. Turn that around. Rely on a flavour against the brand pedigree, if that makes sense. So that means you can have a lot more fun because they've already all been panel approved. As I said, it's only 55% approval rate at the moment. So therefore, we've already filtered out the bad ones. And we've gone, well, this is really good. This is really unique. This is fascinating. This is different. This is old. This is young. This is new. This is fresh. This is ancient, whatever it is. And that way you can open it, enjoy it. And arguably, you're not paying much more either, because you're paying for something that's single cask and cask strength, with all that fantastic excise that the federal government invites us to pay. Forces us to pay, let's be honest. And that way you're having something that's utterly unique, and you can dig into the sort of flavour of the quality that's already been worked out for you. There's already a flavour profile, there's already a tasting note. So that's exciting. That's what it's about. Outturn is this Friday. This is my second last live stream before Outturn. I'll do a bit of a bigger Outturn focus tomorrow night, because it's the night before Outturn, which is our big double issue, our Christmas Outturn. Get all your casks sorted for next month, for December, for festive drinking season now, rather than having to scramble to find some inflated specials that come in coffin boxes with satin lining from your local retailer. You can get some single casks instead. And also get some of the bundles are great, by the way. I was going to talk about the bundles. Invites. I decline the invite, but we'll take the whiskey. Matt's sonnet. Whiskey Stain's good. Whiskey Stain's good to see you, Tim. Rhyming couplets. We uploaded that rhyming couplets as a video. It's a video on the on our Facebook group. That's a really good just sort of segue there. Completely unintentional. But if you're not a member of our Facebook group, yes, we have a page. The page breaks the first announcements on everything, and it's good to follow the page. But the group, the Facebook group, is an awesome little online community. It's only about, I don't know how many people are in it. It's like 1,500 members or something. It's not everyone who's a member of, obviously. It's just sort of, it's a mixture of people who enjoy talking about the society. And it might be what you've tasted recently, what you're thinking about getting an Outturn. It might be, you might talk about a partner bar that you just visited. You might be talking about your travels to the vaults. You might be talking about Outturn. Whatever it is, we encourage you to join up on that group and join in the discussion. One of my rants coming up will be about whiskey groups in general, but this one stays on focus a bit, which is sort of like my point. Anyway, which is lovely. So, and one other thing as well, my last little sort of lambic pentameter. No. So, Jerry D. Minton, good to see you. We're just wrapping up actually, but you can watch this on the story. But before I wrap up, sitting on the table here, which no one even clocked, and I know it's in frame. Is a premium release. It's about half a bottle left in here, but I'm going to share the rest of this around the Sydney Steps. So I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. Maybe I'll reveal this tomorrow night. I know, I'm such a tease. Look at this. So I'm just going to show the back label. It is a black livery bottle. It's something very rare. You're not going to see this outside. You're not going to ever see this on an Outturn either, I'm sorry. It's a .1. It's about half a bottle. That's all I'm going to tell you. And it's a very rare single cask that I want to share with members at the Sydney Steps event. That's December the 6th at the Royal Automobile Club in Sydney. Come along. I think that might be a 2-token dram, because everyone's going to rush for it, I know. And it's also extremely expensive. But it'll be a that might be. It'll be something that you can go for on the night if you want to. We're gonna have so many weird and wacky things on the night, on the Sydney night, which is going to be so much fun. So all these new releases, things from Outturn, things not ever seen before, lots of cool things coming up on that event. It's a step style tasting, so it's a cocktail night. We're going to have live music. We're going to have the room's going to be dressed up for us. It's going to be a lovely evening celebrating the year that was. It's also very cheap. It's like $79 for members, I think, or $69 or $79 for members. And that includes everything, all the food, entertainment, whiskey, everything. I can't think of a better night out for that kind of price. So that's all that's where I'm gonna leave you. I'm not gonna reveal what this is. Tim will be there. Cool. Looking forward to seeing you both there. By the way, you can find the group. I should have said the name of it. You can find the Facebook group that if you're not already in it, it's just called Scotch Malt Whisky Society Australia. It'll come up with probably the page and group when you search that. Just go to the group. If you're not already in it, click to join. I'll approve you in 5 minutes when I finish the stream, and we'll see you all tomorrow night for the night before Outturn stream. Really looking forward to it. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.